while I'm interested mostly on Bohr complementarity and non-commutativity, as you probably noticed. And then Peter will be talking about issues in entanglement experiments. He has been touching upon that quite a lot already. And then Jan will be filling in however he wants, as well as Bob and everybody else. So just a few things. So to start with. Okay. So a basic distinction with a classical object of experimentation is that a QL property does not pertain to a system, but to a concept or a system interacting with an environment. This is the first point. Compared with quantum mechanics, in quantum cognition, we are dealing with much more complex system, which makes it very difficult to prepare systems. And we are mostly dealing with coarse measurements and POVM, that is fuzzy mode. So we usually, when trying to do an experiment, we face difficulty in identifying what is the system in quantum cognition. What properties characterize the properties? Which one of the properties are quantum-like, which one are classical? Which property are reciprocally commuting, non-commuting, and the dimensionality of the system? What is the environment? Context can include or exclude element, on which basis? These are all questions which, when you really face a concrete issue, are not so obvious. I would like just to give the example of the experiment we did and what problem we faced. So from quantum persuasion. So our system was the mental representation of a choice alternative. But what is the relation between a Q, that is a question that I would like to really, a Q quantum-like subjective reality, which is the representation we have in our head, and the classical object of choice. That is, should they be constrained on the way we are updating? Sometimes we are dealing with a very classical object, the representation is supposed to be non-classical, we update non-classically, but that will not be really corresponding to the reality. Are there constraints on that? Should we include some constraints? This is a question that stands, I don't know. Regarding the quantum-like properties, the one we were interested in were beliefs about the value of a characteristic of interest for the choice. But how about preferences? Are they not quantum-like property of the same kind? If they are, what is the correlation with the beliefs? And in fact, the distinction between preferences and beliefs is already quite spurious in classical decision theory. And it becomes, of course, even more problematic in quantum cognition. So these are the kind of question I think we should be able to discuss, and it would be interesting to have your views on that. And what about this environment or context? Or in our case, it was new information that had the effect that we assume to trigger the determination of beliefs. But we took that new information as if it was complete. So you would learn about urgency and you would, collapse or either very urgent or not urgent. But new information is not always complete. And we don't know when we have fuzzy, we talked about that, about those operator fuzzy information. We don't know where a positive operator value measure takes the state. So that also creates a very big problem for, we make an approximation, but that approximation may be not suitable. Besides the semantic content of information, there may be other aspects that affect the state framing. And the semantic aspect, as we've heard many times, may be indeterminate as well. So this makes the how do you say, interpreting the result of the experiment and even, of course, designing the experiment not so obvious. And so one thing I've been thinking about, and maybe close to something that was proposed, that this new information that we were thinking, you know, the person think that urgency is the most important thing, and then we talk about the trustworthiness, and and we saw that this is shifting the beliefs and then coming back, but it could be shifting preferences as well if they are indeterminate. So what is really happening? So this is just to give an example of how in our context those questions arose, and we were not really, we opted for one interpretation that does make some sense, consistent sense, but it's not the only one, and somewhere there is some arbitrariness in that, so that was the, let's go over maybe or maybe a reaction on that, or?
They're huge questions. I think, should I go up to the microphone?
Yes, it will help. Not very slow.
I don't feel like, say...
I think you have to switch it on, perhaps. Yes.
Yeah, there's a lot there. Just trying to gather my thoughts. I think what, if I can speak from the research that we've been doing, I think what we're trying to achieve impact. That's what we'd like to do, is to really be noticed in the field of cognitive science. It's primarily what we're working in. So how do we actually do that? And so what we would aim to achieve is to convince cognitive scientists that are using Bayesian models now for so many tasks, addressing so many problems in cognitive science, to convince them that they have a problem. And that's why we're so interested in contextuality, because once you're setting up a Bayesian model, you've got a joint probability distribution, and what we know about contextuality is you cannot form the joint distribution. So we are trying to actually come up with computation, and I think Lauren and I spoke about this on the first day. So we know from what's being done in quantum physics, for example, EPR experiments. This is a way to show contextuality within quantum physics. So one route is to take that experimental protocol and move it across into cognitive science. And so if you can do that in a justified way, run some experiments, and then show that the joint distribution does not exist, then at least you have the elements for an argument to try and convince people convince cognitive scientists that they've got a problem. But it's very, very hard to do these experiments. Like Lauren and I have been trying, and it's very, very hard to design the protocols in order to have these experiments adhere to the constraints that they are in physics, like this no signaling constraint. And I think this is the thing that really distinguishes, what's been going on in physics, and the problem we had in moving those protocols across into cognitive psychology, because there's a lot of signaling going on in the cognitive system. And so how do we deal with it? Right, so do we suddenly start to talk about contextuality where in the presence of signaling? So do we actually then need to modify notions of contextuality that are accepted in physics and try to change our understandings and how they're defined as we move something like that into this field? And we see some evidence of that. Like Zafarof's work, as I showed on the first day, modifies the Bell inequalities with a factor that takes signaling into account. But in the end, we need to be able to come up with the experiments and collect the data in order to significantly impact cognitive psychology. That's our aim. And my belief is that we need to come up with other protocols in order to do this. Because I think the EPR protocol is, I think, too difficult in terms of experimentally to manage. We've tried a lot and we've failed a lot, and others have the same. So we need to think new. So I think there's a really, really interesting research direction to come up with protocols that are appropriate to cognitive psychology in order to provide convincing demonstrations of contextuality in human information processing. And I think that's the primary sort of question that we're interested in at the moment is coming up with these protocols. So I didn't address what you were saying, but I think this is really I think the way I think about it. This topic.
Thank you. I think I'm going to join in to what Peter just said, and actually what I also mentioned. About 2 years ago, so I'm going to keep this very practical. About 2 years ago, actually, we were interested in this phenomenon that Katarina has just mentioned about from first initial fear in 1992. So about the violation of the Schroeder principle. They have awesome data in their paper. So people would, it's about second gambles. Okay, people have to just propose a first gamble and then afterwards a second gamble. And sometimes they had information that had won the first one, and a lot of time they had information that had lost that first one, and then sometimes you wouldn't tell them whether they had the first one, won the first one or not. And so they have these dramatic effects in the paper. First condition fear 92. So you see this drop. When it's known that they won, 60% plus, when they would take the second gamble. When they know they had lost, again, something like almost 60% would take the second gamble, and this tumbles down to in the 30% when they don't know. It's dramatic. It's really dramatic numbers. So I said, let's do some kind of Hamiltonian model for that, but we need a data set, a data set. So 2 years ago, together with Emmanuel Pons, we said, oh, well, we just put it on MTurk. One pilot didn't work, 120 people. So we changed the protocol, 120 people again, didn't work. It was almost, it was impossible to replicate at first issue fear 92 dramatic data. So their data we just couldn't find. But after a lot of thinking over the protocol and actually really designing it actually to elicit an effect, finally in one of the pilots we got an indication. But actually what happened, the indication was the other way around. So instead of a deflated effect, we found an inflated effect. And for quantum mechanics, that's okay. I mean, interference can go both ways, no problem. But from a psychological point of view, behavioral economics, now that's a big problem. Okay. So actually, what do I want to point out here is actually, we've done a model. I mean, just about to publish. We presented something at Madison last few months ago, what was so difficult for our model was that actually it just covered exactly, step by step, what we were doing in the experimental paradigm. So it contained ordering effects, it contains priming effects of your subjects, and so this, hadn't I known exactly what that happened with the experiment, I would never have been able to make up the model, the quantum mechanical model that would fit. So this is what I just want to convey as a message. If you want to do the model, you have to be really close to the experimental paradigm. Otherwise, it's probably going to be too abstract, or it's not going to work well. At least that's my opinion. So it's a very difficult art. I'm a theoretical physicist. I had no experience with that. And then when I wound up with these mathematical psychologists, it was just opening up a new world. And I had to learn loads of pilot studies that were wasted money. And then in the end, you finally, after 10, 11, 12 pilots, you suddenly get this effect, and you know how to model your quantum mechanical approach.
Thanks. So I'm going to quite a different direction, and I haven't done any experiments myself, but I've got enough slaves to do so for me, so it's a bit different. But so the thing we are doing is slightly different in the sense that we're trying to exploit the identification of quantum mechanical structure in certain places to do new things. So rather than saying we just want to establish evidence, what we are working on is trying to do new things. So we have this compositional framework, which we just stole totally from quantum mechanics, that's what we did. But we're actually not very committed to Hilbert space, which was, for example, also the spirit of Stefano's talk. So we're perfectly happy to stick other spaces in there, which are, for example, much closer related to our sense. Spaces representing vision, spaces representing hearing, spaces representing a lot of stuff, but retaining the compositional structure of quantum mechanics. And so we built models of the brain, for example, the brain, or of our thinking, or something like that. And then we have the beautiful thing that the compositional structure is exactly the same as that of, say, language, exactly the same as that of, say, physics, and so we can start mapping these things on each other. And so one super ambitious project which I have is to turn this in a translator from language into images. And that's total exploration of the quantum mechanical compositional structure. That would be a question. Yeah?
Why do you need quantum mechanics at all?
Well, it depends what you call quantum. I steal the compositional structure from quantum mechanics.
When you say translation from the language to images, you can do it convention.
Well, yeah. As far as I know, there is no compositional theory of language yet at all, so you can't do it. You can translate a word into an image. You can't translate complex composite samples into an image. There is no theory doing the composition itself. It doesn't exist. Well, yeah, it does exist, but it didn't exist. Let's put it like that. I mean, this probably also has a lot of applications in AI. That's one thing we're doing. So we're actually trying to turn the insights, the structural insights, the similarities, into a concrete application. That's another way to go than trying to establish data or proof to show that your cause is right. Now, something totally different we are doing now, which I actually involved in the first time in our life in the experiment. It's slightly different because this is more about how do we conceive quantum as humans? How do we conceive quantum theory as humans? And what we are doing, I mean, my belief is, and this actually is not my belief alone, like people like René Thom, the mathematician, wrote a lot about that children's first thinking is very topological, and many other people have made this Piaget, I mean, I'm not a specialist, like my wife knows a lot more about that, but people like Piaget make strong claims about topological thinking being much more primitive than anything else. Now at school, we just get numbers thrown at us from the start. We just get indoctrinated with numerical thinking from the start. That's it. Topological thinking comes actually very late. extremely late. You have to go to university, you have to do pure math, otherwise you just don't get it at all, right? So the experiment we are now sitting on, we have this graphical topological formula of quantum mechanics. Stefano and I, we're in process of writing a new book, which is a course of quantum theory for 40-year-old. And we're going to show that 40-year-old kids with this way of thinking can outperform university kids using Hilbert space. And there's a lot of experiment we're going to do is we're going to also make the university kids do the topology, and I hope that they do worse than the kids. Because that shows that they're already corrupted in their thinking. And that would be a proof that quantum thinking or conception of quantum should fundamentally be topological too. So it's a different twist on how I would conceive the word quantum cognition. It's a different twist, just rebranding of the word quantum in a way. Yeah.
Is there anyone in the audience who would like to say a word? Yes?
I have a question. If I compare always physics, you need instruments to do experiments. So perhaps one should also have some imagination or some I don't know, some perspective to see perhaps also the instruments you use should evolve also to grasp this quantum, because in quantum physics many effects the technology came with, and then there's new instruments, there's new way of measuring. So in some way it's not just I look at strange effects, I also change my way of investigating. So I don't know, this is an open question. I don't know if in the cognitive science there is some tendency to do that. I don't know.
One thing that comes to mind, like because we're investigating. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Should I wait for the microphone?
Is it open? Is the microphone open?
So yeah, this is a lot from like someone like Lauren, who's a psychologist, is coming up with these measurement instruments. I think there are a lot of tricky things here. Like it's very, very hard to design these things. And also, like for example, I spoke earlier about this hypergraph formalism, and we're using that as a theoretical basis to investigate contextuality. And I wrote a paper about using it, and particularly using that hypergraph formalism in order effects experiments. And then I showed it to I shared it with the physicist at the Perimeter Institute, and then she was a co-developer of that hypergraph formalism. Right? And then she said it's actually quite strange because when you're doing contextuality experiments in physics, the measurement should be simultaneous. Right? It's very, very hard to do simultaneous measurements on human beings. Right? So that's why usually they're serialized in some way, because if you give a stimulus, two stimuli to a human being, they're going to focus on one and then the other more naturally. It's very hard to get them to be.
For non-locality, there are all instruments now who really work in this dual space. So people are. It's like being in another world. Your instruments measure things in another world. So there's like this math from Fourier transform has aided very much for that. You do the spectral measurement, you do everything in, for example, spectral analyzer. All these instruments have been developed because people wanted to measure what are frequencies, and so this was not at the beginning was not at all built. So they really technology also came with. Perhaps there's some way of changing the space or changing. Because quantum physics is more or less that. You really go in other spaces. When you look at some crystals, you do X-rays, and then you get the Fourier transform. You see some image which is not the real image. It's some, it's kind of thinking also going out of the box.
Yeah, that's great. I think we need to do that. But ultimately, when you're designing a protocol, okay, if you're trying to move something over, if you're trying to do a contextuality experiment that's being done in quantum physics and it requires simultaneous measurements, and you're moving it into cognitive science, what are you going to do? So you've either got to try and design the experiment as best as you can to get those simultaneous measurements, or you have to start thinking about, okay, we can't exactly do that. How do we adjust the underlying theory to talk about? And this is what we've been doing with the hypergraphs, and this is she said what we were doing wasn't wrong. It's just that they don't do this in physics, right? So that in a sense, that's proof that the underlying formalism is flexible enough to allow a relaxation, and then you can still drive the theory, and that's the sort of thing we're looking for, is to have some flexibility in the underlying theory, but also try as best as we can to design the protocols. And this is really, really hard work. Like, you know, Lauren and I, we had many failures, was mentioned, you have these pilots, they fail, and you try again, they fail. And it's really, really hard, but we need to do it. We need to learn what doesn't work, and so that our instruments get better and better in the way we measure humans. That's what we're doing.
Sorry, curiosity, is this Berlin?
Berlin,
You work with? Okay.
yeah.
So I'm just wondering if you believe that the problem that we cannot get, say, pure state with human beings is for cognitive pure state, or it's difficult, to prepare people. Is that something that you think that we can have some, response to that, some protocol that would help us come over just in the same way as you're trying to get rid of the signaling issue?
To me?
Yeah.
Yeah, so,
or any,
And so, this is a really rough division. So when you look at this quantum and cognition community, there are those that work with Hilbert-based representations and build cognitive states and Hamiltonians and all those sorts of things. And what you presented was like that. Jerome Usmeyer does that. Then the other camp are the ones that are looking just purely at the probabilities. And why do we do that? Because look, we don't know. We don't know what the underlying Hilbert space representation is. And the first point of contact with the human beings is if you're asking them questions, you collect some data, you can start computing probabilities. So you can actually make some judgments about contextuality, you can use some results based purely on the probabilities without knowing what the underlying Hilbert space representation is. So that's it's not a surrender, but we don't know how to do it really yet. And so that's why we choose to work purely with the probabilistic data, because that's what we've got. That's as close as we can get to what the human is and what they're doing and what they're saying and what they're judging and what they're choosing, and then work with the probability and use probabilistic results in order to determine contextuality. Without understanding, without even asking whether the underlying state is pure or not.
Well, I come from the application side, and perhaps I'm not a pure scientist, and I understand very well that knowledge can only be created by experiments. But what strikes me that, as far as I see, that empirical data is not used in this field, at least to generate ideas or to get a feeling which things could be important. You say it's difficult to estimate the Hilbert space, but wouldn't it be possible to calculate a lot of possible Hilbert space using empirical data from people doing decisions on web pages, where you at least control part of the situation? Once again, I know in the end we have to experiment, but these 2 days I followed the discussion, and I think you prepare one experiment, it doesn't work, okay, then you work a long time to make another better experiment. And there's so much data out there, perhaps at least you can for me, it's always two sides of the coin. I have the empirical data, I can gather ideas, make pragmatic models, and then design the one in the real experiment to prove them or not.
I think you're right. Like I already told you that Jerome Bussemeyer's work in order-space modeling that does similar to what you do. When I say that, like we focus on experiments that collect data directly from humans, but you're right. There's lots of data out there, like click logs, all sorts of log files that has been collected, and there's people, Sagar and others, Dimitri will be talking about sort of research that's been in the information retrieval area, trying to use those sort of data sources. But there's always the question about, okay, you've got to make assumptions about where that data comes in, and how good are those assumptions, right? So that we prefer, even when you're directly dealing with the humans and collecting the data, even then sometimes you've got a lot of noise coming in. But with this sort of data, the level of indirection is even further. So you have to be very, very careful about how it is that you're interpreting that data, and how that data relates to a judgment that a human made in a certain situation. It can be done, and I think we should try to use those sources. And we're not rejecting them. We just haven't done that yet.
No, I would like to hear Eric or other experimentalists to hear if those questions are already present in classical experimentation, some of those, or is it something that you feel is different?
I might say something, my opinion on what he was saying. So I think that with the experiment they're doing behavioral economics, so I'm quite used to it. So my idea is that anyway, you should imagine now it's a big issue of replicability studies. So now it's an important one because a simple experiment anyway, and even 100, 200 students is just like a realization of a random of the time series. I mean, you have just one you can see. So I mean, it's you can overfit them with models and so on. So you need at least a lot. So you have, in a certain sense, the need to realize more experiments. Usually or identical, but you don't publish with identical studies. So what you need to do is eventually to control better the experiment, make correct assumption, and so on. And so usually the researchers prefer to invent or adapt the environment. But anyway, it's true that it's very difficult. And the exercise to fit the model on a simple set, even of a database of 200 students. I mean, as he was mentioning about the replicability study that he performed with the data on the shorting principle. I mean, it's a big problem. So maybe sometimes it's interesting not to study only one data set to provide to change the condition of the experiment. This is my viewpoint.
A very stupid question. Maybe this is already. Most experiments are with humans. Are there any experiments which show the correlation with animals? For example, because humans, we can always say, well, if you have some students which know that the professor likes, so they try maybe to falsify the results. But animals would be more, when we would show that animals violate, it would be more impressive, I think. Because animals don't think in mathematics, they just do something which is their nature.
Short remark. Actually, there was this species of lizards which have 3 columns and which are in a paper stone scissors relationship of dominance, and there's some population oscillation going on, and apparently in one of the papers, acts, you can show that actually this type of population oscillations can be covered with certain approaches from quantum-like modeling. Though, what does that mean? What does that mean? I mean, where's the measurement process going on? I mean, I want to be very careful there. I mean, is that a mating strategy which is actually corresponds with the measurement collapse or not? So I don't want to make a claim on that.
I think that from what I read so far about that, is that there are some animals that have been shown that they violate the transitivity axiom of the expected utility, and there have been some literature trying to explain under an evolutionary point of view why animals violate the expected utility, because supposedly they should always go after the rewards that give them the highest food. And the explanation that they give is that if the animals were growing, if we consider evolution, if we were just making that evolution in just one specific context or ambient, then they would maximize always their utility function. But since they have always to adapt to different scenarios, it's not guaranteed to always have the maximum. That's why, at least this is what I slightly viewed in the literature, but indeed they violate axioms like the transitivity one.
So, thanks for that insight. I just shortly want to go back to your idea about preparing pure states in your subjects. Actually, so that's that's a concern for modeling, I think, rather than for making sure that you are doing an experimental paradigm. Actually, when we were preparing a certain experimental flow, you are at one stage priming your subjects, and from those conditions of priming, you can kind of deducing that that the belief states of those subjects will be in a pure state. Now, if that priming is actually multiple, I mean, you prime in different ways, it kind of tends either to go to a superpositional state or to a mixture. And so, in the end, choosing between those, I think, would be more like an optimization procedure than an experimental possibility to verify. So it's just my personal view there. Now, there's another tendency, because in psychology these days, it's just not to be interested by average values, but to look at distributions in reactions around a single subjects. So one of the questions I want to put is actually, what is the status of the state vector in psychology? I mean, in psychological applications, is this an individual's representation, or is this more like to be considered as an averaging over a subject group? So maybe that's also interesting to think about, or to have some reflections on.
I thought maybe coming on something else, which is related to the preparation or to the difficulty of getting into a pure state. So I saw that one way of maybe making some step forward, I'm not sure, would be to look at a more elementary level, which would be perceptual. And possibly if you work at a perceptual level, then you are dealing with simpler things, and you can prepare better the system. This is an idea, and I don't know, by the way, Michel has, you here? Yeah. Hasn't Varela done anything in that direction? Working on perception, visual perception, things that could be of interest for us.
I think so, yeah. You know that Varela had a theory, an inactive theory of perception, in which perceiving red or blue is not a characteristic of either the object or the subject, but it comes out from the interaction. So it's not something that is projected on any entity. It's relational. So maybe it can be of interest, I think, for the case of quantum models.
So
be a sort of quantum model of inactive theory of perception. This is up to you.
Problem that it requires a lot of money to make those experiments. That's another.
Just by the way, there is someone with whom you could collaborate. It's Valérie Bonardel in England, somewhere close to London. She's one of the best specialists of this various theory of perception, and she would be very interested in.
She's experimentalist.
She's experimentalist.
That could be
I'm just going back when Michel gave his first talk, right, and then so much of what we've said subsequently is somewhat sort of not counter what he was saying. In his talk, he was talking about models that are small measurements, right? And then when we talk about cognitive state vectors, we're representing some cognitive state. And I just wonder whether sometimes we get, when we start thinking about these things, that we become trapped into thinking about representations and thinking about these models, and then forget, I think, the bigger picture that he presented, which I thought was very, very, very interesting. You know, this idea that we that it isn't about representing some sort of reality, and our ontological assumptions about what the phenomena that we're dealing with. And I think sometimes the danger of doing this experimentation is you get so hung up in the details, you get so hung up about coming up with a representation of the cognitive state of an individual that matches sort of data, that we get into this small measurement, this small model thinking, and then we actually forget what I thought was, I really appreciated that broader philosophical picture that he was presenting, where I think it certainly can free up our thinking in terms of not being trapped in amongst all those details. I don't know what I'm trying to say here, but I've talked myself into a loop, I think. Yeah. Anyway, maybe I should stop this loop.
Yeah. This is sort of going back on what you just said, and then the analogy with physics, like this sort of experiments versus physics experiments. I was two thoughts on that. The first one, the difficulty with physics experiments, which you don't have with any form of cognition, is that we can't really look into physics. You need to be really, really good to look into quantum physics, to do these things like you've done. That takes many years of training and many years of experience. So if we talk about cognition and thinking, I'm just observing it now in my head. So I've got this advantage that I see what's going on in my head, and maybe you should take it seriously. And the first thing I then realize is what's going on in my head is not a vector. I can't see the vector in my head. I can see maybe images, I can see dreams, but I don't see the vector. I find it very hard to think that it has to be a vector that you model on the level of cognition. Of course, I understand where the vectors come from.
Yeah.
It's a result of the empirical method, but maybe one should reconsider the empirical method to better match what we actually see when we see inside of our own heads. That's like you favor or saying that maybe we're making it too difficult by trying to make the analogy with physics where things are really difficult. And I think what makes it even more difficult is that a lot of the concepts in physics, like non-locality, contextuality, in the way physicists define them, they were negative properties. They were the failure of something. Non-locality is the failure of locality. Non-contextuality is again the failure of a certain model. So basically, the way physicists define these is saying what something is not. They don't say what it should be instead. And I think the first thing to do is then coming from your perception of like what would be really going on in our head that has this sort of quantum-like features. So then actually coming up with a reasonable model, yeah, that's probably what's going on in our head. And that's something physicists will never have produced because they're so obsessed with the negative aspect of it, the fact that it's the failure of something, all these properties. They're usually defined like, okay, the way this is formulated is all quantum mechanics can't be put in this sort of model. It's always cannot. It's never, it has this feature. No, it has this failure. And it's, so you're saying nothing in a way. You understand what I'm saying? So maybe one should be a bit creative before one starts testing and then sort of just imagine, because the thing is just sitting here, what actually the extra non-quantum feature would look like. I mean, that's the way I would do it.
Can I ask, can I ask Michelle, like when you were talking about transcendentalism, how does that relate to what we're talking about here? What can that? Yeah.
This issue of negative features is indeed very interesting, and maybe you think of Kant, who said the thing in itself cannot be elucidated. What we have is only the byproduct of a relation between us and whatever there is. So I think it's also a negative feature. It's a suspension of any judgment about something that is beyond phenomena. And I think in many cases, in physics, there are apparently positive features that are derived from negative features. For instance, Galois, Evariste Galois, the man who invented the group theory, he said exactly that. He said that we can draw some positive features of physical processes out of the negative fact that there is no change if you, say, rotate by a certain angle your process and so on. So the fact that there is no variation under rotation implies certain features. And I think the Noether theorem is a perfect example of that, isn't it? Noether theorem says, since you cannot have variation of laws by translation, by rotation, translation time, translation in space, and so on, then you have certain laws of conservation. So it's very clear that this exchange between negative features and positive features is very crucial in physics. So I agree with Bob.
We won't get much further, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll be working on protocols, thinking deeper on how negative features. It's not, and we are.
I also have a question, but I'm struggling to formulate it. But so I think we kind of understand that with the quantum mechanics, it goes beyond our control, and we don't understand everything. So I'm wondering, is the matter about having more control? Because lab experiments against, for example, field studies or theories is about having control, having a full control about the environment, having the perfect control of everything. So I'm wondering, should it be the same thing for quantum cognition, about lab experiments and online survey, for example? Because, I mean, I don't know. Which I think that we are trying to have a control about everything, whereas the points of quantum cognition is something beyond our control. I don't know if it's
I was just going to say, I think it's probably impossible to have that control unless we try to find parts of cognition that have less variables across different subjects, which is what we were thinking in the hot system, because it's very basic and common across different people. But in terms of the amount of influence that past experiences and memories and genetics and everything has, it's impossible to be able to control for all of those, which means it makes it very difficult to create an experiment that matches the level of control that there is in quantum physics. So yeah, I think maybe we've got to focus on things and perception as well, where there's not a whole lot of variation between different people, because just in the way that it's more biological and common, and maybe trying to go through those systems and inquire through those systems rather than the very variable analytical type decisions. That's just my thoughts.
So, thank you everybody. Now we are free until the gala dinner. And as we say, those who want can meet at 7:15 at the Garibaldi Place, the Garibaldi in the center, the big square. And then we go together by foot. It's a very nice walk. Or you can go on your own. So, well, let's see later. We have a nice